Hey y'all. Thank y'all for coming. When Ivy and I woke up this morning, my wife Ivy there, she said, who in the world do you think is going to show up on a Saturday morning on this beautiful Saturday? And the chosen are going to show up, the special people of God, and we appreciate you get extra blessings for coming out this morning on this beautiful day. And but on this important topic, this is our first Highland Avenue Forum after the pandemic. Highland Avenue Forum is an event, or speaker series that we hold at this church, which attempts to engage our congregation and any surrounding congregations in the whole city in topics that are of social concern and greater community concern. And there couldn't be a more important one, I think, than this. As you all know, Alabama has had one of the highest incarceration rates in the country for many years now. We had been making some progress at decreasing the prison population, but it's going back up. We basically, we're down to a 10% grant rate on paroles, so the parole system is basically broken. We're back above 20,000 as a population in custody population, and that means we're 165% of capacity, of design capacity, so in our prisons. And the U.S. Justice Department has filed a complaint and will go to trial against the Alabama Department of Corrections and the state, charging that we maintain unconstitutional conditions in our prisons, men's prisons. If you want some disturbing reading, read the complaint that the Justice Department filed that details the conditions in Alabama's prisons, or turn to some of Carla's work at Appleseed. We have our moderator here, Mary Scott Hodgin. I recommend highly y'all go to the podcast Deliberate Indifference, produced by WBHM and led by Mary Scott. It's a harrowing story that goes from the origins of our prison crisis up to our current dysfunction. There's in Scripture, we name this, the title of this, Remember Those Who Are in Prison, drawing from the Hebrews quote, verse 13, 1 through 3. At the more extensive reading of that, remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. And I think as we have this conversation, I think it's important for us to remember those words and think about what we might do. Hopefully we come away at the end of this with some idea of how we might change what's a completely dysfunctional system. We are particularly focusing on reentry in this panel. The idea that, with the idea that maybe there is something hopeful we can do about at least helping those who have served their time and deserve a fair shot at rejoining society, but who are lacking support and facing great obstacles in that. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Mary Scott Hodgin, who will be our moderator.
Thanks so much. So I'm Mary Scott Hodgin. I'm a reporter at WBHM, and as was mentioned, I produced the podcast Deliberate Indifference, which touches on many of the issues in Alabama's prison system. So we're gonna hopefully take things piece by piece today, because it's a lot, and I think the sort of arc of the conversation will hopefully follow sort of talking about the issues inside the system, and then how those issues affect reentry, and then what we can do about it. So I'd love for the panel to start with introductions, where we start over here with Dena, and then go down the line. Just introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Dena Dickerson. I am, hello? Sorry. I typically do not do this on a Saturday morning. I normally run around in tennis shoes behind 13 to 17-year-old boys for about 4 hours, and I realize then I'm 53 years old. So I am Dena Dickerson. I'm the COO of the Offender Alumni Association, which was founded here in Birmingham in 2014 as a result of the need for persons that was exiting incarceration to have a supportive community and a safe space to be as they work through some of the challenges that they face after incarceration. So I'll leave it there and I'll pass it on to Mr. Sherer.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeremy Sherer. I'm an Assistant United States Attorney with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Alabama. I've been in that role now for 11 years. It was a new position within our office, as well as the Department of Justice, and which was created by then U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. And I was then, and am still now, I believe, the only AUSA in the entire country that does not carry a caseload. My entire portfolio of work is focused on crime prevention, and that includes reentry and working with community service providers to help those who are coming into risk of contacting our justice system, as well as those who are exiting our justice system as well.
Good morning, I'm Carla Crowder. I'm a former journalist and a lawyer, and I currently work as Executive Director of Alabama Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. When I was at the Birmingham News many years ago, working alongside Tom Spencer, I covered the prison system and spent a lot of time inside prison alongside incarcerated people, and realized many of them did not need to be there. So I went to law school with the goal of challenging mass incarceration, fighting the death penalty, and hopefully creating avenues of release for some of those incarcerated people. So I've been at Appleseed almost 4 years now, and we have completely shifted our work to issues of economic justice, racial justice, and criminal justice reform. We are very engaged with confronting the crisis in prisons and trying to help the state find solutions, because there are ways to fix this. We just have to do things differently.
My name is Ronald Keith. I served 37 years in prison. I've held several jobs since been out here. One with OAA, Alethea House, and now I'm working full-time with Alabama Appleseed. My title is Ranger Coordinator.
Okay, great. So obviously a great panel, great group. And so I want to start with where we are right now. We heard some of the issues kind of laid out, big picture from Tom, but I want to start with kind of the data. So if, for example, how many people are in prison? How many prisons do we have? Carla, I was wondering if you could kind of help us out with that. So where are we sort of in the layout, zoom out, and what does Alabama's prison system look like?
So where we are now is about 20,000 people incarcerated in secure facilities. Another 5,000 to 6,000 in either community corrections programs or in some sort of other detention, maybe a county jail or some sort of community setting. So we're talking about 26,000 to 27,000 people in the Department of Corrections, what they call jurisdictional custody. These prisons are spread across the state. The ones that are the subject of the DOJ litigation are 13 prisons only for men. So previously, the women's prison, Tutwiler, which is down in Wetumpka, was also the subject of a civil rights investigation from the Department of Justice. This was around 2012 to 2013. So Alabama has the distinction of being the only prison system in the country where the entire system, men's prisons, women's prisons, have been under federal investigation, litigation, or control within the last decade. What happened with Tutwiler, though, is as horrific as the conditions were, the state decided to do something different, to own it, and to make some changes. And so there has been rehabilitative programs, there's been a building added for prisons and services, there were consultants who came in and said, you gotta get rid of this management, they are not working. And the state agreed to make changes instead of doubling down and fighting like the state is doing now with the men's prisons. So conditions, while, yeah, we wouldn't be happy with what's happening in Tutwiler, we wouldn't want our loved ones there. Conditions have gotten a lot better. And they've gotten better without building a new prison. So I think that's really important to remember. It's been management changes, programmatic changes, leadership changes. So with the men's prisons, what happened is, what's fascinating to me about the DOJ investigation, many things, really important case, but that it is truly bipartisan. So it began under U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, the investigation began. And if I have any of this wrong, Jeremy, please correct me. And it continued under the Trump administration, and the lawsuit was filed and signed by Bill Barr. So these are not people, particularly under the Trump administration, Bill Barr, who are considered big, liberal reformers in criminal justice. But conditions were so bad that even, this very conservative, tough on crime administration stepped in and filed the lawsuit. And what this case is about is not just overcrowding. It's not just the state doesn't have enough money and is not spending money the right ways. It's about a culture of corruption, of promoting corrupt managers, of not holding people accountable. The state has known of this kind of corruption, that the dorms in many of these prisons are just open air drug markets, that people are being killed or being assaulted, sexually assaulted, and the investigations about how this is happening and why are just not happening. There is not accountability. So when we think about the need for prisons, and I'm not a prison abolitionist. There are people out there who believe we need to get rid of all prisons, and that's not a hill I'm gonna die on. But we want prisons to be safe. We want prisons to rehabilitate people. You want people to come out a little bit better, hopefully a lot better than when they went in. And there's hardly any possibility, any way for that to happen under these current conditions. So I want to jump back a little bit in time with our male prisons, because when I was covering the prison system, and during some of the time that Ron spent a lot of time there were a lot of really good programs. You could go in and get an associate's degree in psychology. You could get trained to be a drug treatment counselor. You could get your plumbing certificate, as some of the folks here have experienced. And the prisons were even more crowded then. The population was even higher. The problem was they were run by wardens and captains who were more experienced and cared about rehabilitation, and they had staff. They had, they were never fully staffed, but they weren't at half the staff that they are now. And so there was a time when we locked up more people, we spent less money, but the prisons were functioning more. And I just think that's a really important point. There's something else happening here, other than just money, other than just buildings and crowding. So I would say in the late 90s to early 2000s, up until about 2010 or so, the prisons were functioning much better. So what the Department of Justice has done is really laid out a failed, dysfunctional system in a lot of ways that cannot be fixed by new construction alone. And that is what the DOJ said in its complaint. But what has been the response of the state? So interestingly, my timing at Appleseed, I joined Appleseed in January of 2019. And we were kind of trying to figure out what we wanted to do with criminal justice or some of the other issues we worked on. And then in April is when that DOJ complaint, or the first report, was made public. And I was at the legislature at the time, and our lawmakers stood in front of a group of stakeholders and reporters and vowed to take this crisis seriously. This was probably March or April, no, I'm sorry, it would have been May of 2019. We are not going to kick the can down the road again. They said over and over again during that legislative session. All they did was pass a bill to raise the salaries of correctional officers, which resulted in a slight bump. And they also created a correctional officer position where they needed a lot less training and education. They thought that would be the solution. You have a broken system, so you send in officers that don't have much training. And that is literally all the legislature did for 2 years, and the system deteriorated. We have the highest rate of homicide, suicide, and drug overdose of any prison system in the country. Prisons don't have to be this way. So we've been on notice that we are being sued, and we have done nothing to improve the conditions, and they have gotten extraordinarily more dangerous and more violent and more deaths. Just this year, there are 55 documented deaths related to drug use, and those are either murders that are related to deaths, suicides, or overdoses. So I probably overwhelmed you with kind of grim information. But again, there are states that have these challenges that are moving in a different direction. So I hope further along in the program we'll have the opportunity to talk about some of those opportunities in Alabama.
Yeah,
I bet you have some things to add.
I was gonna say, while you were in Montgomery, Ron was inside those prisons. So Ron, I don't know if you could take it wherever you want to take it, but for example, what was a day like inside the men's prison?
Well, really depends on where you live at, because mostly in my later, say, 2 decades, I was mostly in and out of a structure dorm we call it Alumni. And that's a structure where everybody practically has a job. It's something to do. You got responsibilities. You got purpose. But if you just in a regular dorm, it's no telling what might happen. It was nothing to see a guy get stabbed up once I'm in the chow hall, or what we call the dining hall, where a guy kind of just walked behind another guy, stabbed him in the neck, and blood shooting everywhere. I've seen a guy get his lip bit off. I've also seen a guy straddling another guy, and he probably tried to stab him 30 times, and he blocked each one of them. I think he had not one time. But a lot of the violence is really a result of drug use, because once you become an addict, you need it, and you're going to try to get it when you can. If it comes to crawling up under somebody's bed and trying to catch a sleeping snake in this box, and if you get caught, hey, there's just the consequences. And then some guys, because of, their strengths in packs, some people call them gangs, some people I know you may have a group of Muslim guys that just stay together. You may have a group of Christians, but they're groups in packs. But then you may have the gangs, you may just have a group of intelligent guys, that just go to school all the time, whatever. But it's all about survival. And because of what she described and how dangerous prisons are, me and 2 of my comrades said, we're lucky to be out alive, to be honest with you. And right now, we know a lot of the guys are still in prison, and we're physicalized right now, because there have been nights where I've been told, and not just by one person, that the prison has been ran almost by just 5 officers. They're so short. And sometimes it's like 12, maybe in the daytime. Weekend, maybe 7, 8. But when you think about that not only puts the officers in danger and the staff, but most importantly, it puts the inmates in danger. Because the officers are there to protect the inmates. But if you're not here to protect me, you're not going to protect me, then I got to protect myself. If one of your sons ends up in prison for something that may be mine, he may just have to be in there for a few months or a year. But if you don't get in there and get him a knife, he's going to become prey. And that's because we just can't put on, we have allowed the prisons to get to that condition. But we can change it. Because right now I'm looking at all of y'all vote. I'm quite sure all of y'all know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody. But you gotta let them know that, hey, this has got to change, because I know we love Alabama. I'm not gonna lie to you. I want to go back to Tennessee, but I love Birmingham. I love what's going on in Birmingham. And I want to be about to change, about making this change. And that makes me feel so good working with Carla. I am making changes. And that's what we're here for. I hope you will do the same to help us do this.
Dena, do you want to add anything about conditions inside?
No, Trump. I'm weak on
Trauma is real. Let's say that. And if we look at things from a human lens, And I heard Ron say that the officers are there to protect those persons that are incarcerated. And I've heard other people say, but they want to come home too. You know, they don't want to get hurt in there, because people have literally been in stabbings and trying to get out of the dorm, and the officers are in a queue and they won't, because they're afraid, right? And so being a person, a community person and a citizen and a human being, I'm sure the people that are incarcerated want to come home too. And so as Ronald was talking about the conditions of that place, it took me back to when I walked through the back gate of Tutwiler, and all of the things that I had heard about prison and all of that stuff started becoming a reality to an extent in my life, and being sprayed down like an animal with Delight spray and standing there naked in a room. And for any of you guys that have an artistic ability and get to see in pictures, I'm sorry, but anyway, I'm standing there and all this gunk is on me, and I'm having to stand there for 20 minutes until it does whatever it needs to do, and then told by someone, go get in the shower. And I'm standing around 25 other people that I do not know that's naked as well. And then the saga begins, you know, and then to walk inside of that place, and before they put doors on the shower area and the bathroom areas, being dehumanized around every corner. And so what we find is that instead of a person being conditioned or reconditioned to re-enter society, a person is being conditioned to live inside of a society that's inside of society. And when we send them home, that's what we have to deal with. So I would move to say a person pretty much has to rehabilitate themselves. And I think at one time, maybe it was Einstein or someone says, how can you expect someone to use the same mindset that got them in a situation to get them out of a situation? And so waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to have breakfast and being given stuff that you can't really identify. And I'm a person that didn't eat meat at the time. And so when I chose to take a tray without any meat on it, I was told I need to get everything on the line, which why would I get something that I'm going to throw in the trash? Why would I do that when someone else can eat it? So these are my thoughts going in. But because you need everything on the line and don't touch a tray until you get to the end, I was pulled and assaulted and sent to the shift office and to the healthcare, and it was my fault. So I'm gonna yield right there just to give you a little bit of what our family members and our neighbors are going through even now, because listening to Jerry saying that he has been, you know, at the U.S. Attorney's Office 11 years, and he's talking about prevention, and I'm thinking I've been home 10 years and 2 years after, and then adding to Ron's sentiment about wanting to be a part of the solution. And I was told that those closest to the problem is close to the solution. And then Carla being inside years and years ago, writing about these conditions, choosing a career path to make a difference. And I think all of us are sitting here on a Saturday morning because that's exactly what we know that our state needs is change, and especially as it relates to individuals that are incarcerated. Because I took my family inside of prison with me, that means we now have about 26,000 families that are incarcerated that are still living through these conditions, whether they're in there or they're out here. So I'll yield back to you, Mary. Thanks.
Yeah, before we move on to how these issues affect reentry, I wanted to ask Jeremy I had someone ask me once, like, what is the standard? And I think that could be answered in many ways, but from a federal perspective, you know, when the DOJ is saying that Alabama's prisons don't meet constitutional standards, but they're saying, you know, our prisons are some of the most violent, what are they comparing that to?
So I think everyone is in agreement that Alabama's current system doesn't work. Half of the people who are incarcerated have been there before. We have a system that is broken and specializes in brokenness. Roughly 10,000 people come in and out of the state system every year. As Carla mentioned, we have 20,000 plus incarcerated. We have another 2 times plus that on community supervision with Alabama Pardons and Parole. So roughly about 90,000 people each year are either incarcerated or on state supervision. The financial cost of that is about 1/3 of our general fund budget. It's about $800 million each year of our $2.2 billion general fund budget. It's an incredibly expensive felt product that does not work. And it's rinse and repeat, and folks who go in with a lot of risk factors come out with even more risk factors. They're worse off when they come out most of the time than they were when they first went in. So in comparison, what works in reentry is not a secret. There's been an incredible amount of research and studies done on what can be most effective, impactful in improving outcomes for folks who are justice involved. And some of that is cognitive behavioral thinking, cognitive behavioral therapy, which can change the way people engage in stressful situations, how they think and process through situations so they make better decisions. Actually giving marketable job skills like Carla talked about, some of the things that we used to do. If you're able to get a job coming out of prison, you are half as likely to return to prison. We don't do enough drug treatment, drug therapy, substance abuse treatment, all the things that matter most, and nurturing and building family connections as well. Every guy, and I generally say guy, that I've ever talked with who has come out of prison, when I ask them what they want to do, they say that they want to get a job and they want to take care of their families. And I think that is a very basic, humane, human desire to do, and I believe that they're incredibly sincere, and absolutely they have different diligence in following through with that because oftentimes they don't know how to actually pursue that. So on the federal side, we deal with a population that has more prolific criminal records, criminal histories. Practically everyone who's been in the federal system has been in the state system before. They have voluminous, decades-long criminal histories oftentimes, but then they go into federal prison. It is impossible to not take part in programming. It is impossible to avoid drug treatment and therapy if you have a documented substance abuse issue. It's impossible to not get some kind of workforce development training. And then when you come out, you get supervision that matters as well. And you go through a residential reentry facility. Also, you're not just released back into the community and cast into the wind and and told good luck. And so you're given somebody to walk beside you. Yeah, they're trying to make sure that you're doing right as well, but they're also there to point you in the right direction. And the federal system as well tries to give you services and support along the way. I've had federal judges who have met with folks who have recently returned to the community, and they have reentry meetings with them going over all the things that they need. There are states and there are systems that do this better than Alabama, and we can learn from them. We have brought in experts before from Georgia and Tennessee and Texas and other places that have confronted this problem before to talk with our policymakers. And some of them have listened, and some of them said, we just don't want to go that route. We want to be vindictive, for lack of better words, and not give pathways for redemption in our community because it is politically advantageous that way. But there are other models, more successful models. The federal system has about half the recidivism rate that the state system has. Our federal supervisees, again, more prolific offenders, have a recidivism rate of about 30%, whereas the state system is about 50% repeat offender population. So there are better ways to do this.
Sure. So as we just heard, federal system, just summing it up, you have maybe more access to drug treatment programs, more access to rehabilitative programs, more support on the back end once you leave. I want to compare that with Alabama's system. We've talked about the conditions inside. Ron, I was wondering if you could take this in terms of tell us about just leaving prison. What does the state give you and what does the state do to help you re-enter or lack thereof?
Seriously, there used to be what they call a reentry program, where they would, when guys that's coming up for parole, I'm not sure how many months, and that they would give them certain classes like how to open a bank account, get a house, just different basic things, but they don't do that no more, and it's just, and even if, and the guys that take it, most of them don't go because they feel they're gonna make parole anyway. But for, say, a guy like us with lifelong parole, no, you can't get into class. If you, just like the college courses, you're not allowed to take trade if you got lifelong parole. In fact, years ago when the glory days, when they were allowing guys to get educated, at St. Clair, they had academic courses. But somebody in Montgomery saw a guy in a news article sitting up in the office. He was like a secretary, where really just talking about how wonderful it is to be able to educate yourself and all this. But the guy was like, why are we spending money on people that's going to die? We're wasting money. And so you can't take a trade. And I was just talking, me and Alex was talking to a guy the other day, and a client we was talking about working with, and we was asking, okay, why you haven't taken the classes? Why you don't have a GED? And he said, they won't let me take GED. And I'm like, wow, you want to get a GED? Because I think one time it should be a requirement. If you don't have a GED or high school diploma, the only way you can make parole is to get it. And at one time it was pushing that. But I can give you some horror stories about the actual GED department there and who runs it, but you don't want to try to get it fired now. But it's really crazy. But in prison now, you have to rehabilitate yourself. You have to come to a realization that you got to strengthen your mind or go crazy. And me, I left with nearly 200 certificates. I can't even remember all the classes I was taking, but I was just taking classes because the more I learned, the more I felt empowered, the more I felt like, hey, I was worth it. This. I'm not just going to sell for this. But now, if you used to educate guys properly in prison, rehabilitate them, and just think if you get 1,000 of them out, and be productive like us three, and send them to each different schools and things where they can share their story, then you'll see some changes. But now the guys are getting out, they don't have a support system. A lot of guys now that get out on parole, they may have mental issues. They end up walking the streets, living up on the bridges and stuff. You have some brilliant minds in prison. I swear to God, you have some brilliant minds in prison. But because of the pressures going on and the things that everyday stress, guys find themselves giving up because they feel that you don't care. They actually feel that you don't care nothing about them no more. And so what's the choice to do? Sit there, drink, take drugs, because that seems the easy way out. Suicide, and I don't want to go into the suicides. There were different ways I've seen guys try to commit suicide. To be honest with you, I thought about it myself. I got tired of it. It got crazy. And no, I wasn't on drugs. I just got tired of the everyday same thing. And so that's why my motto had to be, I didn't have the luxury of being productive. And that's why I kept taking classes. That's why I kept teaching guys, barbering, tutoring, because it's something I had to do. And so that's when I got an opportunity to meet, like, man, there's some smart guys in there. But some of them in there for murder, some in there for rape. But some in there for, like us, haven't hurt anybody. Just sitting in there for decades, just waiting to die. Forgotten, just forgotten. And there's so many more in there that we can save and help.
Yeah, and Dena, I wanted to throw kind of the same question at you. I've spent time watching Dena work, and she's almost always on the phone, almost always, helping somebody out with something. What do you see? Like, what are some of the experiences that people have coming out of prison? What are some of the barriers that they face?
Maybe I need to just hold it.
I need to come back to you because I know I'm concerned you're gonna be dozing off.
This is good. No, wait, God, this is good. This is good. I've talked so much in 10 years. It's like, okay, let somebody else talk. And it's wonderful hearing Ron and seeing him from day one and the supportive community that he had embarked upon. It's just like Jeremy was sharing, reentry actually starts from the judge's bench. When you're sentenced, your reentry process should start then. So what I've seen with many people that I've worked with and have had the privilege and honor of assisting them in their reentry process so they won't experience as many challenges and barriers. One of the main things is that the social anxiety is there. You don't feel like you're a part of society. You don't feel like you're worthy of anything. And for many that have done 2, 3, and 4 decades, not having family connections, not remembering, not being educated, not having the technological savviness that's needed to navigate in spaces, trying to connect the language that's being used today and the language that they used to use. Like the guy that I worked with that did 30 years, he didn't know how to use a debit card. And his thing was Dena, because they gave him $10 or $25 or something on a card and released it. And he's like, you went to the store and he said, Dena, I was at the register and I was paying for my peanuts. And the lady asked me did I want cash back. She was going to give me $20. Do you think she was going to give me like $20? And so I had to explain to him, yes, your bank is in your hand. And we were eating pizza. So I was trying to think of a way to relay that to him in a way that he would understand. So I got to go back 30 years and think about what was 30 years like. Well, one, people would walk out to the car and pump your gas for you, and you know, this kind of stuff. So I took the red pepper and I said, this is the bank. This is where all of your money is. And so all of this pepper in here is your money. And that is your card in your hand. So instead of you having to physically go into a bank and do business transactions, you don't have to do that anymore. You can actually withdraw money, for lack of better words, from your card. So when you're paying for something, you realize, oh yeah, by the way, I'm gonna go over here and I may need $40 there. You could hit a cashback thing and they would actually give you cashback. But now it would deduct from this, and so I had to pull out and it was this weird, he's like, oh, but the light switch. So doing real time with individuals as they're navigating to the pathway of success for their lives, and that takes a lot of patience and a lot of intentionality and a lot of investment, as what Jeremy had expressed with the criminal justice system as it relates to the federal level. And so when people lack that, then they're at a disadvantage when they get here. So I applaud Ron and all the work that he's doing with the gentlemen that are coming home after decades and decades, because he can identify with that. And that's not to take away from anyone else. So these are the things that I see, not having that family connection. So we create that community of friends and people that understand, that won't judge you. And we connect with employers that are willing to give persons work with the understanding that they may not have the right now skill set, but that doesn't mean that they can't get there. And it's another way of asking them to invest in the individual. Yeah, we know you got a product that you need to get out and everything, but if we're talking about community safety, and all of us want public safety, then this is how you assist in making that happen. Since we can't get things in the legislative body to pass through that will really, really help this process for individuals. So it's those kind of things, and not knowing how to fill out job applications online because they wrote everything on paper, and not using computers while they were inside, and not even knowing how to explain to individuals what their skill set is, because they do have work and they do have skill sets based on some of the jobs they may have held on the inside, or some things that they may have done before, prior to going to prison. And a lot of mental health challenges are there, whether that was some things that has happened throughout their incarceration that created it, or whether that was something that actually sent them to prison before, you know, that was untreated, undiagnosed. And so it behooves me to think that we will use a pre-sentencing investigation to get all of the history from an individual, say, oh, this is why they've done this, this, and this, but because of this and they're predisposed to this, then we're going to sentence them to that because this is what they did in their juvenile history and all this kind of stuff. And we use these other assessment tools like the ORAS assessment, but we never addressed this for 10, 20, and 30 years. I did 10 years and I couldn't get a GED because I was a long-time offender. I was someone that they thought was gonna be there 30 years, and I had time to get my life together. And I remember standing on the panel of individuals, because I'm a person that had to go through a reentry process, just as these individuals, and they did not recommend for me to take anything or to do anything. This is just a formality, and so this is what's happening to the mass majority of individuals that are incarcerated or the ones that have came home that we must do real time with. And so to those challenges, that's what it looks like, Mayor.
Yeah, and I know it's so much of a Venn diagram where you have the issues, on someone coming in with pre-existing trauma and then not being addressed, maybe getting worse inside prison, and then not having the programs inside prison to, like, why aren't they equipped to fill out a job application? Why aren't you learning that in prison? That all builds up to make the reentry process more challenging, and then with the reentry process, the support isn't there as well. And we could go down a lot of rabbit holes. I don't know if we want to touch on parole rates right now, but I will just make that point that I think that's also just a point from prison to reentry that right now has certainly gotten a lot of people talking about a lot of these issues, because people are not getting paroled nearly as often as they have in the past, and so it's, from what I've heard, taken away a lot of hope, a lot of sort of incentive to, even participate in the programs that do exist. And in
Can I
fact,
add something?
yeah.
What she said concerning, we've actually done classes and did some studies in prison on this with Connie Carla. But this thing is called the digital divide, where guys in prison are deliberately being kept from learning computer skills, learning how advanced we've got. We were happy when they finally got tablets in the prison. Well, they got them after I left, but when I was working at ABE, we got some tablets in ABE, and it was so much educational material on that. But the ones they've got now for everybody, they're just slot machines. That's all they are. There's very little dental education. You listen to music, send an email, but everything practically you're doing, you have to pay for it. It's a slot machine. And we've got to accept that the prisons now, well, in Alabama, are just modern day plantations. Seriously. If you remember, but it was a time when slaves couldn't change clothes to get a new set of clothes once a year. That's how it is in prison. You just get a new set of clothes once a year. You may get some new underwear every 6 months. But the way they treat, chain, shackle, beat is no different than the plantation. And the fury that you see in their eyes when they do it. But the thing that hurts me more about prison now is that they don't care if you don't get your mind together. They don't care if you was able to contact with your loved ones. They don't even care about, say for instance, the phones that's coming into prison. The reason a lot of the phones come to prison is one, that guys need to communicate. Guys need to reach out to try to get some help. And guys use these phones to try to learn. But because they're contraband, then those who can't afford them, because the phones are high, and the inmates not getting the phones in. They can't go to the store and buy them. Somebody else is bringing them in. And when they bring them in, then once you get one, your life is in danger. Because other people want these phones, because, you can do so much with them. But in other states, cell phones are, you can buy a cell phone. But what they're doing now is they monopolizing. If you knew the prices on using those wall phones, majority of things in prison is about making money, getting money from the families, not trying to put it back into the prison. And that's what's really one of the hurtful things there, because, man, guys are hungry to get their mind out, to come out here. Guys want to be productive when they get out, but they're not getting the right information. And it's being blocked. Seriously, it's being blocked. And that's another thing that we need you to help push. Open the door for more education, more people to come into prison. Because if you do that, you have guys coming out like us. If you was just getting a conversation with one of us, and you wouldn't even know they've been in prison. When they mention you, oh, for real? Because you don't think guys in prison come out like us. You think they come out like, say, the ones you see drug out or whatever, or the ones you hear on the news, but that's not the case. Everybody in prison is not enough for murder or rape or whatever. I swear to God, they're not. They're not. I'm telling you. But for some reason, society thinks that we got to keep all of them locked up. That's the most craziest thing I've heard in the world, you know? And when you got guys in there that have been put off and they've done everything they can to get out of, I mean everything, not in one disciplinary, and they go to parole board and get set off 5 years. When you've done everything, what you think that does to the psyche? It makes a person want to give up. It'll make you want to kill yourself. I know a guy did 32 years. He did 90% of his time working in the chapel. Went up for parole. Turned him down, set him off 5 years. He's done everything, and I won everything for 32 years. And that's what's going on in our parole system, which we don't want to get into that. But I want to point that out about these protagonists and about how they're still just making money off us. Well, guys in prison are really commodities now. And they've been used as commodities in certain different ways, but you need to educate yourself on that. She has all the statistics, and they're correct.
Yeah, and we can touch on that for sure if y'all want to. And I think it'll be part of the breakout groups, that discussion. I want to talk before we do breakout groups about some of the programs in the community that are filling in the gaps. And so some of the things that work. So, you know, I think anyone can kind of talk about this, but Carla, I was curious if you could maybe share some of the stories of y'all's work.
Sure. So Appleseed has traditionally been a research and policy reform, doing a lot of work in the legislature. We did not intend to create a reentry program, but we realized there was such a huge need. And then also, there were these great services in the Birmingham area. And if we could just connect formerly incarcerated people to those services at UAB, at Christ Health, at the Salvation Army, then they could thrive. And so a lot of our work is just kind of navigating services that are already available. But I'll tell the story of what we do through the experience of a couple clients. As Ron mentioned, most of the people we serve are sentenced to life without parole, and so they'll die in prison without our advocacy. But we've also noticed that we can make a difference with parole a little bit. So we get a lot of intake, people who want our help. And when we identify people up for parole where we think, okay, if we go advocate, maybe they'll get a shot. So we did some parole advocacy for a man who literally all of his offenses are marijuana related, multiple marijuana related offenses, but he served almost 20 years. And he had some, mental health challenges, some anxiety, but he was doing time at Elmore. So we argued in front of the parole board that he really needed to get out, that we would provide some services. And lo and behold, they granted parole, which is very rare these days. And so, we knew he had some challenges. And our staff attorney, Alex Legank, had serious conversations with him before he was released about not using any drugs. You want to make sure when you get out, you have a negative drug screen, because we found him housing at Shepherd's Fold, which is a reentry center in the Winona area that's been really effective. Many of our clients have lived there. So this gentleman had a brother in law enforcement who was helpful as well. So it is release day for our client. His brother picks him up. They go celebrate with a beer after he gets out. Not good, because he's going to be drug screened. But then Ron and Alex get him set up at Shepherd's Fold. And again, he's gone in only for marijuana. They screen him as soon as he goes to Shepherd's Fold. He tests positive for fentanyl. And he explained that there was a birthday party in the dorm on Saturday. And so this guy's struggling. So he used fentanyl 3 days before his release, which people who use drugs are going to use drugs. He probably never got any drug treatment the whole time he was there. So we had to scramble and provide alternative housing for him for a couple days until he could test negative. But he did. He tested negative, and now he is getting services at the day reporting centers that are centers that Pardons and Parole plugs people into GED, job training, different supportive services. His brother's still part of his life. Ron and Alex are getting him all the IDs that he needs, and just kind of regularly checking in on him. So this is a very high-need, challenging individual, but he has been out, how long, a month now?
Yes, a little over a month.
And he has not relapsed, which is a really big deal for somebody with that profile. So had we not connected him with Shepherd's Fold, had we not given him some tough love early on about what he needed to do, he would have very easily relapsed. And had he stayed in Elmore for another 2 years, he could have very easily died. So that's probably one of the harder stories there. But I also want to lift up our work with somebody who's here today, Joe Bennett. And I told him I was going to put him on the spot. So Joe grew up in Birmingham, and he spent 23 years in the Department of Corrections without a single disciplinary violation. He was working in the chapel, and we found out about Joe, I think, from Ron. But also there was a gentleman in Prison Fellowship who was very close with Joe and said, if you can get Joe out, I will give him a job. And this is our friend Robert, who has a tree service. And so Joe got out almost exactly a year ago and literally had a job on day one. And we had to say, hold on, like some other things need to happen before full-time employment. He needs his IDs, he needs to make sure he's healthy, he needs health insurance. He needs some job readiness. And so we kind of had to put the brakes on Joe's full-time employment, which I think you agreed that probably need to happen. There was a little arm twisting that happened.
A lot.
A lot. But you know, he got health care, he got classes at UAB Eye Care, and eventually he started working full-time. And within 3 months, we were like, all right, you're pretty self-sufficient, Joe. You're doing really good. He was paying his own rent at Shepherd's Fold. And in this summer, he got his own apartment, like right up the hill there. I call you our superstar. Yes, I know. You're a very, very spiritual guy too, so God has been with you on this journey. Well, 3 weeks ago, I got a call about 6 o'clock at night that Joe broke his wrist in the tree chipper at work, and he can't find emergency care. So I thought he was like literally driving around with a dangling wrist. So he had gotten some care at the ER, but you needed to really, get it looked at and possibly surgery. So we were able to arrange, luckily enough, Appleseed has an orthopedic surgeon on our board, and that was just an amazing stroke of luck. And so Joe got the care he needs. He has health care through the exchange, and so he was able to get that covered. But now, his rehabilitation process is going to be 3 to 6 months. So without his employer who's going to help, Appleseed is going to help, some community supports will help. Where would he be if he didn't have that health care, if he hadn't had access to that surgery? This is Joe's dominant arm, and he's a really strong guy who has a lot of years of work in front of him. But it could end very different without the support that he's gotten.
Yeah, okay, great story. Jeremy, are there any programs that you could talk about that work, or things that we could implement in Alabama, or implement more of that we might already have?
There's several groups that work with various areas of reentry. Folks who come out have a multitude of needs, whether it's job identification, housing, substance abuse treatment, and so there are groups that focus on individual slices of that we work with. Some of them have been mentioned, like Alethea House. Here in Birmingham, the two biggest, most evidence-based, solid, consistent programs that the Department of Justice works with are the Offender Alumni Association and then the Dena Project as well. Both of those groups get federal resources. They are comprehensive and walk alongside folks as they try and traverse all of the various issues of reentry that they deal with. I will also mention one more that has just taken hold in Birmingham, Jefferson County. It's part of a national network, and it's called Camp Hope America. And it works with kids who have high adverse childhood experiences. And so a lot of the kids who are part of Camp Hope America, kids who are 8 to 14 years old, those are kids who come from families whose parents are justice involved. And so there is a strong correlation that if you have a parent or a family member who's justice involved, your likelihood of being involved in the justice system in the future is increased. And so one place of Birmingham has developed a Camp Hope America site where they identify kids who have high adverse childhood experience scores. And it's a year-long program, and they try to step in and give them pro-social engagement and reduce the likelihood that they might come into contact with the justice system. So those are 3 programs that our office in the Department of Justice works with often.
Okay, great. I guess I do want to make sure, are there any questions from any folks out here? Y'all have any questions? Yeah, I don't know, should I use this? I think you can just yell it out, right? Okay.
Yeah. I'm curious because we're
Do stand up.
Yeah.
Do stand up and talk.
We're about to go into an election cycle, midterms in November. This state, when you're looking at advertisements for politicians, the number one thing it seems like that comes across is tough on crime bills. I'd like to ask the panel, what is your definition of tough on crime when you look at what politicians are saying? Because to me, what this seems like is politicians are creating this environment. It's in the correctional system. And I don't know if it's a combination of not caring, not understanding, but or lack of resources and money. It seems like we have some things where people are very involved in doing phenomenal jobs, but when you hear politicians saying they're going to be tough on crime, what does that mean to y'all?
I'll say the first thing, even though I'm not supposed to talk about politics. I will differentiate where the narrative is on this issue nationally versus in our state. So nationally, there's been no issue that I've seen over the last decade plus that has been more bipartisan than how to handle justice issues. For conservatives or the traditional fiscal conservative, this is a very expensive issue that, like I said, it is a failed product. I have been to governor's summits in Georgia, in Tennessee, in Texas, where you have your stereotypical Southern conservative white governor who is a champion on this issue because they want to make workers and taxpayers out of these individuals who are going through these systems instead of a financial burden upon the state. And then, of course, you have your social progressives, and then you have your faith-based groups. The Second Chance Act, which was the first federal funding stream for prevention and reentry services, was created under the George W. Bush administration. It was then expanded under President Obama's administration, and Attorney General Eric Holder created my position and other positions like mine around the country. President Trump passed the First Step Act as well with a Republican Congress. And so nationally, leaders come at this matter. We've had functions with the Koch brothers in Birmingham, Jefferson County on fair chance employment because, again, they want to create self-sufficient individuals. There's every reason to be a leader on this issue, whether it's morality or whether it's finances or whether it's public safety, because helping people succeed at reentry decreases the likelihood that they will commit crime. And so there are a multitude of angles to approach this issue on nationally. We get them more right than we do in the state. It seems to be more of the stereotypical, either you're tough on crime or tug a thug. That's the label that gets thrown on the other side. And most of the folks who are justice involved, either they can't vote or they don't know that they can vote. And so politicians don't advocate or lead on issues that involve people who don't vote. And so it's a very easy issue to make people scared, to take one horrible incident and make citizens in the community think that that is emblematic of everyone who comes through the justice system. And so I'll differentiate that nationally they get it more right, and on the state side we tend to be more so driven out of fear than anything else.
There's not much I can add to that, but I would like to point out in Alabama, I see a real scary response to the Department of Justice litigation emerging as the state has gone 3 years without really responding, and yet the lawsuit hasn't gone away. What I'm hearing from conservative legislators and out of the Attorney General's office is that if the Department of Justice comes in and forces some serious changes, if the state, whatever that looks like, then the Attorney General's office, the tough on crime crowd, will just say, it's the Biden Justice Department beating us up. So there's no real incentive right now for a Republican supermajority and Republican Attorney General and Governor to make these changes, to make the prison safer, to make reentry safer, because they can just blame it on the Biden Justice Department, which they couldn't do when we had Bill Barr and Trump's name on the lawsuit. So that's really disappointing. Just one other fact when we talk about tough on crime, I mean, it's a bumper sticker. It's not a strategy. When you look at America's response to how we do prison, so we have 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the incarcerated people in the world. So if prisons, if tough on crime work to make us safer and to curb violence, we would be the safest civilization in all of humanity. So it's a failed strategy.
Any other questions?
Going back to something you said earlier, what is the reason why there's such a low parole response? I don't quite understand why.
Well, I think that's a great segue from what we just talked about. Who wants to talk about the?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, ma'am. She said, can you tell me if I'm paraphrasing correctly? Can you explain why the parole rates are so low? This actually corresponds to this conversation about reactions to high-profile crimes, in my opinion. So, does anyone want to tell? As the moderator, I feel the need to punt this to someone else. So,
I'll jump in there. So, parole rates had gone up between about 2016, 2017, 2018. That's the time when actually some good reforms were happening in Alabama. The prison population was declining. And our crime rates were actually declining at the same time. We were locking up fewer people and we were safer. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Pardons and Paroles did not ramp up their supervision of people. They didn't hire enough people. They didn't spend enough money at the time they were releasing more people. And so many people they released did really well. One person who they released out of thousands, within 6 months of release, he was not being monitored, he wasn't reporting, he didn't get treatment for mental illness, and he was using drugs again. And he was arrested with a horrific triple murder in Marshall County, a man named Jimmy Spencer. And so there was a huge round of finger pointing. How could they let him go? What went wrong? What went wrong is that he wasn't supervised because we didn't invest in supervision in reentry. There was really nothing in his background that suggested that something like this would happen. Parole is risky. You're always, when people are coming out of these horrific prisons, there's always a risk that they won't be treated, that they'll still be using drugs, that something could happen. So there's always risk. But in response to Jimmy Spencer, parole stopped for months. The head of the parole board was removed. The legislature passed a bill that gave all power to appoint the parole board members to the governor's office. And so she appointed a woman who was a career prosecutor and a old school tough on crime politician, a woman named Lee Gwathney, who has completely controlled parole decisions. Even though there are 3 members on the board, pretty much they all vote for her or with her. And her reign has resulted in this enormous decline in parole.
and I mean, I do think that, does anyone else have another question right now? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So you might already hear, I'm not from here, I'm from Europe, so my question might be a bit weird, sorry for that. But do you know how much money the state spends on probation officers or parole officers? Because in Austria at least, we understand the role of a probation officer as a social worker. So they are there to assist and to help get people that were formerly incarcerated get a job, get apartments and everything. So I was wondering, is there any attempt to change the system here? Because you can totally use those guys to help them.
Well,
To control them.
and I'll say that Pardons and Paroles is the state's largest law enforcement agency because they supervise around 60, 70,000 people. We talk a lot about DOC, who has 25,000 people. Pardons and Paroles has twice that. ADOC's budget is around $700 million. Pardons and Paroles budget is around $90 million. And so 1/7. Pardons and Paroles historically, until about the last 8 years, they were a purely law enforcement agency. So we think of them as you are thinking of them as reentry facilitators. They're the ones who are in the community and hopefully pointing people in the right directions. That was not part of their job description. They were law enforcement officers to make sure people were complying with their terms and conditions and release, and that's it. So as Carla mentioned, about 2014, 2015, there was legislation that revamped pardons and paroles in their mission statement. So reentry was incorporated in that, but there's still scaling of those services. So Carla also mentioned day reporting centers. Those are scattered sites around the state where higher risk supervisees go in for a multitude of services. That's been a step in the right direction, but we need more of that. And that's part of justice reinvestment, taking money from corrections and putting it into rehabilitation and treatment.
Can I just piggyback on that just for a bit? That's still, I'm Stacey Beck, I'm from UAB, in the political science department, and I was in the social work department before, and criminal justice department before that. So, but it's still my understanding that those agencies that you're talking about, even in this ramp up and change, do not routinely employ master level social workers. Right? It's not, the mindset hasn't changed to a social work function. It's just, we just added reentry onto it. Is that correct? So the philosophy has not changed.
Correct. I think probably agency-wide they might have 5 social workers, around the state. Yeah, so it's not a department of philosophy overall. Yeah.
And since we're talking about reentry, my biggest pet peeve, because parole is ramping up and they need to, and they have these day reporting centers, but we don't spend any state money whatsoever on reentry housing for people, like absolutely zero. And so people can be plugged into some of these services by day, but they have to report like 8 hours a day and they can't work, and there's nobody funding their housing. So that's a big issue.
Well, I don't know, Dena, if you work with any folks who are on probation and parole, like what do you see in terms of the interaction with their parole officers, or, is there that support that she's talking about?
They're getting there.
Okay.
The day reporting center, I'm there twice a week and doing reentry services in groups. And the newer officers have a little bit more of a heart for the people, if you will, a little bit more compassionate and patient, definitely trying to plug them into some things, calling on community resources in order to help their parolees navigate the space, all the way down to when they're removed from, say, a halfway house that will lead them to being homeless, trying to find them safe and stable housing, which, as Carla had mentioned, is near to none, especially when the person that will have to be housed has a fee that they need to pay. Where does that money come from? The individual isn't working. They're at the day reporting center Monday through Friday from 8:30 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, and they have a curfew for 7 o'clock p.m. Most of them don't have driver's license, and we can say, well, you can do what you can, but that's very hard for an individual that there's a thumb on that person, and there's so much wiggle room that they have, and whenever they suggest what may be helpful in their process is being denied because of the process. Well, no, you can't go to work, because you're in phase 1, but I don't have to come here on Saturdays and Sundays, So now it leads a person to survival tactics, which I need to make some kind of money. And so I will go and work somewhere up under the table on Saturday and Sunday so that I can pay a fee or I can help with a bill in a family member's home that's now bills have doubled because I'm there, and then I get penalized for it if they find out that, so it's a very hard space for individuals to be in.
Okay, do we want to do breakout groups? Should we still, or keep going, or we had the thought of doing that. Okay.
Yeah, I think moving toward tangible solutions, the idea with, we had an idea of breakout groups. We're not quite, I don't know how you want to do it, but tell me how.
Yeah, I think we can do it kind of the way we had set it up. So like if Carla and Jeremy want to do a sort of a mini session with folks about policy action items, and looking at things that have maybe could be presented this coming session, or national, federal policies. And then if Dena and Ron, and if any other folks who have spent time in prison want to do a conversation sort of about reentry, from personal experience, what are some of the services that y'all could use more of in the community. So kind of an inside prison walls policy conversation, and outside prison walls community, take action on the community level. So it'd be great if we could kind of split folks up. I don't know how we want to split folks up.
Kind of led to thinking about how we can directly help people who are coming out of
Exactly.
reentering society, come to this side of the room, and on this side of the room,
Voting
we
booth.
are inclined to talk to legislators to try to influence policy.
Lobbyists to the left.
And then we're going to drink. We'll report back out, and we want to come out with tangible steps that we could take on either subject, and report back to the whole.
Yeah, maybe like 20 minutes. I think that should be enough time, and then come back together. Okay.
All right, we're gonna report back. And somehow or another, the Spencer brothers have been deputized as the reporters. So our group had a lively discussion. We were the policy group, and I would say we didn't even get to some of the stuff we could have covered, but Appleseed is going to be producing shortly a bill that will target about 230 people who are serving life without parole, and we'll hopefully get their sentence. It will be a bill that will be a vehicle for reevaluating their life without parole sentences, and hopefully create a possible venue for those that are safe and rehabilitated and screened and so forth, that the judge agrees could be released. This would, otherwise they're going to be in prison through the end of their lives, and facing all the decline that comes with age. And the suggestion to move that along, Carla has had initial conversations with some legislators, but has not found somebody to carry the bill. David Faulkner, who went to high school with some of us and represents others in this room, is on the Judiciary Committee and is influential. So we're going to try to get a delegation of folks together once the report is out, and we have talking points to meet with him, and also possibly with Dan Roberts, who's a Republican state senator, who also would be key on this, to try to persuade them to at least entertain the notion. And the second thing that we talked about is, apparently one of the mega prisons is probably going to be built, the one in Elmore County, and what has not really happened is getting together with the prison commissioner and talking about what it should look like and what should be included there, the kind of services and so forth. So we talked about getting an alliance of academics and people with experience in reentry services and social work, public health, and setting up a meeting with the prison commissioner and talking to him about what would be better to include in the new prison. That's something that hasn't necessarily been addressed very much because we have advocacy groups who have kind of been fighting the idea of a mega prison and others who've been in support of it, but there's nobody that has really talked about, gone to the mat for what should be included.
Tom, is this going to be a state? We haven't even gotten to the issue of private prison. And I'm speaking for myself, I'm going to be ghastly out here. It should never happen. So is the one you're talking about going to be a...
Publicly, it's a state-run facility. We kind of, that private prison, the private construction bill fell through. The state is building one, they plan to build two, but they don't really have the money for the second one, and that's kind of in limbo. But this one is probably going to be built, and we should address that. Further work could be meeting with Cam Ward. There's going to be a push to, through pardons and paroles, have funding for reentry housing. If we can do that, at least get a foothold in that will address one of the problems that we tend to have. And just be aware to any extent possible, if you have connections with Steve Marshall, the Attorney General, there's going to be a lot of defense played in the next legislative session because he has been assertive about rolling back some of the criminal justice reforms that we've had over the last number of years and the sentencing reforms. And so if anybody knows anybody who's connected to Steve Marshall or would be able to talk to him, we'd like to do that. And just, Carla, is there one, apparently when you get out of prison, you're not issued a state ID, or why couldn't we just do that? Why would the state of Alabama not do that?
The state of Alabama twice, in 2015 and in 2021, passed a law that said the Department of Corrections has to provide a birth certificate, a social security card, and make an effort to get you a non-driver ID when you leave prison. That has never been implemented. It is the most basic thing. We have pulled together working groups and pilot projects and and the DOC is just failing to do the most basic. I mean, it can't keep people alive, so it should come as no surprise that they can't.
And they got any number of excuses as to why they can't make it happen.
That seems like a really easy thing to force the issue, even with the most diehard punitive justice person, to say, if you give these people these things, they can get a job and make money and pay taxes again.
It is just, it would say a failed system.
But anyway, our agitation group will will also have that on the agenda.
So I just want to interject for a moment because of what's taking place now with the person from the strike or whatever. I spoke with a young lady that's been incarcerated since she was 16 years old. She's 39 years old. They grew up in that place, and she reached out to us the other day, and she was talking about it and everything. And I said, well, why aren't you guys going to go to some of the classes which has nothing to do with the Department of Corrections? And I understand you saying you're not going to do any work in slave labor and stuff. And she said, why should we, when everything that we're doing to better ourselves, they won't allow us to exercise it without freedom? And I couldn't argue that. That I could not argue that they have stopped going to the degree program that all the
there are a lot of challenges we got.
You really not tell them why they denied them their parole. Like if
Mhm.
I wanted to apply for a car, get a car, and they said, well, your credit is good, they would send me something in the mail that says these are things that's on there, these are things that you know when they address the time. But it's a democratic right, that to fair things, and is that fair to the individuals that they are denying? That you want to tell them what they can do to get
Yeah.
them?
Yeah, the parole
I just want to say.
issue is awful.
Okay.
Thank you, Dena. Cliff?
Okay, so I'm Cliff Spencer. So I'm representing the boots on the ground, right? That's our team. So we talked a lot about these issues in regards to the need for housing, the need for documents, the challenges that are involved in just getting the documentation needed that apparently is supposed to happen anyway. So documents, housing, transportation, peer support specialists trying to get, trying to help groups like the OAA and help them do what they do, help them do better what they can do, and financial education. So just a lot of it seems like, and you guys correct me and add to it if I'm wrong, but a lot of what we talked about, what we came up with is finding ways as a community to help with these basic needs for reentry. And we have people in our community that can help with financial literacy programs. At our company, we have a very basic like personal budget template that we try to help employees with to help them manage their finances, pay their bills, and understand the debts that they owe. Because a lot of the, parole debts or restitution debts, they're not even fully aware of. They just get bills all of a sudden, and and if they don't keep up with it, then they're in danger of going back in. So, basic financial literacy, basic computer literacy, because all this stuff is now digital. You have to be able to use a tablet and fill out forms. You have to have a phone, which to a lot of people is a huge challenge. So are there ways that we as a community can support that, can help in sort of an educational way, and without reinventing the wheel as well, because we have organizations that are doing a lot of this good work and have identified all these steps already for us, for the community. So if we can either engage more with the different groups, either Appleseed or OAA or others that you've mentioned, Salvation Army's program, or are there ways that we as a community can supplement those? I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the STARE program, the education at Hayes Elementary and Norwood and other schools. So that's reaching people from, what'd you say, 5 to second grade to 8th grade. So we also talked about the importance of early childhood education. We touched on the importance of education in this whole issue, is that the education is so important for the conditions that create what happens to someone later in life. So the STARE program is an effort to help address that. Well, is there something that can be done to extend the STARE program in a way to deal with some of these needs from 9th grade on and deal with adults who need similar support and similar education? So that's not tactical, that's just more questions.
So when are y'all
Well, it seems like there's opportunity to create new programs to fill in some of the gaps, but also contribute to the existing groups. Like I heard a lot of interest to, if someone needs a ride to go to an appointment, but there are folks here who want to help with that. I think those sort of tactical volunteer opportunities are nice in terms of if Appleseed and OAA, they'll have opportunities make those look more known, so people, that people can help in that way. Obviously donations, supporting the groups that are doing the work. But from where I sit, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, there's also this just lack of connectivity. So there's like groups helping at different points. But there's not like a lot of connectivity. So I guess in just being aware of things helps know, okay, this person can go to this group, or I can help in this way, or yeah.
Is there a master list, or could we get one from the panel of the needs and the organizations that serve and opportunities for volunteer help or financial? If we can have a master list, it's a lot to take in, not maybe, but that would be really.
Well, I think that would be a tactical position to take. That would be an action item that our group could take, because we identified, and the mayor said recently, like, there are a lot of organizations out there doing great work. So you don't need to start any new organizations. You just need to plug into the ones that are already doing good work and help them out. So that would be an action item, is that we can sort of identify this.
Let me jump in with a couple things. I hadn't thought about this. Believe it, I thought about this one now. There is actually a reentry commission that meets in Montgomery. So they have recognized this need, legislation passed, and it is agency heads from Veterans Affairs and Labor and DHR, and Cam Ward is there. And they meet regularly, although it's a little bit hard to track down. Have you been to some?
Yeah.
Some meetings? If some of this group wanted to show up at one of their meetings and actually start like peeling off some of those agency heads and saying, hey, we really care about what's going on. We're following, reentry and prison issues. What can we do? That would rock their world. Because normally it's just like a few lobbyists and, insiders who show up to something like that. So I'll communicate maybe with Tom when that group's going to be meeting. It's usually like a Thursday at 11 o'clock or something like that. In Montgomery. Yeah, which can be tricky, but they're kind of floundering. They can't really figure out what to do. But you have all of these agency heads in one room. They're supposed to be addressing recidivism. And they can hear from people. So I'll think more about that. And then in terms of I just want to echo, we don't need new programs, but we do need, we're down a social worker at Appleseed. So often, I'm driving people to medical appointments or whatever. We need transportation. We can figure out a way to come out from there.
And this is kind of a long-reaching goal, but I'm going to just put it out here so you can look for it. I'm currently working with the group Motion Rocks, who's the IT folks here in town, to develop an app that is a reentry resource app. We got an interdisciplinary grant at UAB between the political science and the art department to work with them so we can put together this app. We are only going to be, and I don't speak IT, but this is only going to be the beta version of this app. So we have a long way to go, but it is going to be launched, and we'll need users to do some, help use it and see what's necessary and that sort of thing. But that could help link. That's the idea, is that all this stuff is going on in the community, and people come back into the community and don't know where to start with anything like this. So how do you link people together? And so more to come, but we are working on the beta. I haven't actually launched the beta.
Are you all familiar with Grace Line Community Food Bank?
Yes.
Where you can, they have an app, and you as an individual can sign on there, and people who have restaurants basically say, on Tuesday at 3 p.m. we will be shutting down Press-Line Bagel. We'll have 8 garbage bags full, or however many bags full of bagels, and we need someone to sign up to come by and pick this up and take it to a particular food bank, or in some cases to a particular individual who may be living in a critic or some sort of thing like that. The app that they have could be replicated and do all of these things very efficiently, easily, because that provides individual people within the community capacity to go through and say, at this point of this day, I'm probably going to be in this part of town. What can I do to help someone there? And it helps that flow of actually getting small, very, very minimal but very useful tasks done by people who are elsewise living their lives and not having to give up everything, and they can sacrifice for commitment. And it makes it a lot more
churches, I can't think of the address, one of the food banks, but it's kind of far out. But say that I can go there and get me a box of food. All right, but I can also be what they call a fast food. And say if I have 10 families, or even 20 of them, they would give me enough food to like load up a truck. But I would have to go and separate it so I can feed all these families. So in other words, you can create your own food back there, you know, by just going through Great Plains. Because I have to go to a couple of networks, and it's another thing, they have these lunches, and where you get to meet some of the most incredible people that's doing things with the business and just getting back to you love to be around.
All right. I was gonna say one thing. Carla mentioned that y'all have some videos. Can we get you to send those to us so that, because to me, one of the most important things is education awareness. I don't think enough people understand how bad and how not simple it would be to fix, but I mean, there are things that we know will work that will be proactive instead of reactive. Reactive costs a lot more than proactive does in any phase of life. And we can get that, you know, and start disseminating this to people. You never know what, it can touch somebody who can be a major influencer in this later on down the road.
What I think we're gonna do probably around February is a film festival where the two films are shown at sidewalks and other places. I want to be involved with the screenings, publicizing the screening, getting legislators, corporate people, finance people, all the people there. That would be one of the.
Great. Thank y'all so much for coming out. I want to, you can mill about and stay as long as you want, but I want to keep it to the advertised 9 to 11, but this conversation will continue. For those that, I hope everybody's put your name and email down on the list, and I think we'll send out follow-up information.
On the table. And there,
I brought it in, so I'll have it up here on the podium if anybody needs to add their name to the list and recruit more people to the cause, because there's a lot to be done, obviously. Yeah, no, this is designed to be embracing of everything. Thank y'all so much.